You have accessed the podcast of OA, located deep within Sector 14845 and powered by the Emerald Light of Will. The podcast of OA is your guide to the Green Lantern universe. Hosted by Lantern Myron Rumsey, the podcast of OA begins now.
Welcome, everyone. This is episode number 133 of the podcast of OA. I'm your co-host, Myron Rumsey, and I'm joined, as always, by my good friend, Phil Bova. Phil, my friend, how are you doing?
I'm frozen here in the Midwest. Temperatures are dropping, so we're staying warm as much as possible.
I'm right there with you. It's been pretty cold here. We were closed. Most of our schools were closed today. It was minus 10 overnight, and the wind chill made it even colder, and now they're talking next week it'll be in the 50s. So go figure.
Yeah, it's about how it's been here. I was off work for the past 2 days. They called off our school entirely. And I think a lot of it has to do with the buses and the kids at the bus stop. I'm in a city school, so it's public. So, I've had a lot of teenagers even complain to me that there's no heat on their poor buses.
Yeah, that's always bad. I'm more of like in a rural area, so we have a lot of cases where kids are standing outside for extended periods of time waiting for their bus, perhaps at the end of a long driveway, or if they're a certain distance away, they walk to school. So that was probably the biggest consideration, is thinking about those kids that have to walk and the frostbite-like conditions that are outside.
Yeah, that makes sense.
But it's good to be back to talk a little bit about stuff. We don't have an issue of the Morrison book to talk about, but we're going to do a double retro review episode, so I'm kind of excited.
Yeah, me too, man. I got caught up on the Kyle Rayner stuff, and I just figure I'm going to focus on some of these characters that, they may not be my number one, but they do deserve some spotlight because they still are part of the Green Lantern Corps.
That's very true. And for mine, I want to spotlight the very first appearance of Guy Gardner.
Awesome. And I'm going to spotlight the ring coming over to Kyle Rayner. So that's going to be a good one. It's
going to be a lot of fun. Before we get into the comic book chat, there's been a lot of stuff going on lately in terms of the comics and in particular the movies that I don't know whether people have kept up on or not. So I thought maybe it would be worth taking a few minutes to talk about it. One of them being, the solicitations for April of 2019 came out from DC Comics, and Titans is being canceled with the April issue, which is where Kyle Rayner has been. He just showed up there not too long ago. So the $1 million question is what happens to Kyle once he leaves that book? Or, I would assume with the popularity of Young Justice on the DC Universe app and the Titans show, that we're going to get a Titans book back, but I kind of wonder if they're going to rebrand it a little bit to be more like the TV shows in terms of at least the roster of characters. You got any thoughts about it at all?
Well, but if they're going to do that, I mean, that just kind of leaves Kyle Rayner as the wild card. You know what I mean? So if they're going to gear it towards the program, and then that's all well and good, then that just means they're going to focus on a centralized core of characters. That means there's no room for Kyle Rayner to be involved, because I seriously doubt that. And it just seems like DC at this point and Warner Brothers at this point is not doing anything with Green Lanterns that has to do with television series or otherwise. Just little tidbits here and there where they throw out for the fans, but that's about all they're doing. And I find it highly unlikely that if they do mirror the programming and they do shift rails to a different type of title, I don't think they're going to do anything with Kyle Rayner. I think he'll be X'd. And I was starting to pick up the book because Kyle Rayner's in it.
Yeah, it's kind of frustrating for fans of the character because, where else do these people have to go? These characters are not anywhere out there for people to read about them. Guy hasn't been seen anywhere, although I heard he was in maybe the Mysteries in Space Valentine book that just came out, just shown on OA, and Kyle did just show up in the Justice League annual.
Okay, both of which I haven't read yet, so.
Yeah, me too. With the weather that we've had this last week, I have not been to my comic shop yet. And of course, Jessica is over in Justice League Odyssey. So it's just kind of a weird time, but I feel bad for fans that were excited about Kyle being in Titans and kind of having the rug pulled out from underneath them all of a sudden.
Yeah, but that seems to be the case, that they do that all the time with Kyle Rayner. It's like, it's almost like they don't know what to do with him, but I don't know how that's such a complex process. I mean, he's been a tier lantern for a long time, and I mean, let's be honest here. He's also been through all spectrums of the ring. So, I mean, if there's anybody that deserves to have some kind of title, or at least have something to do with the Green Lantern Corps, you'd think it'd be Kyle Rayner. I mean, I don't know. I don't know what DC's plans are at this point. It's just kind of met with disappointment a little bit.
Yeah, it's kind of strange, and there's been a recent shakeup in terms of some of the positions at DC. So who knows what's going on behind the scenes? I mean, the other thing, people were talking a lot about the sales of the Green Lantern book because, the first issue hit number 2 in December when it came out, and it sold 113,000 copies. Issue 2, when it came out this past month in January, or no, it was December. Excuse me, I got my months confused. But it dropped 43.6%. So already was like, the sky is falling. And I'm not quite sure how to look at that. I mean, when New 52 came out, it dropped about 16% between issue 1 and 2. Green Lanterns dropped about 15% between issues 1 and 2. Hal Jordan, the Green Lantern Corps, dropped about 5% between issues 1 and 2. So it's a bigger drop than what we've seen in the Green Lantern books in the past, but at the same time, we don't know what the digital sales are. Whenever they come out with these sales figures, it's all based on what was ordered by the comic shops. And we don't know about the digital sales. And in talking to a number of people, especially people that are overseas, they're getting their books more and more digitally because comic shops are, they're closing all over the place. There seems to be kind of an epidemic of shops closing. So people are turning more and more to the digital stuff, and maybe that's making up the difference. I think a positive sign was I saw on social media about a week or so ago that Liam Sharp said that they were signed down for a second year. So it must be that DC is pleased enough with what they're seeing with the book in the first few issues that they're not dropping the ball there, as far as I can tell.
Well, I would think usually it's a telltale sign by issue 6 on how forward they're going to go with the title. You know what I mean? I don't know. That's just me. From what I've learned whenever things like shift, when they shift writers and artists at the same time. And giving it a year, I mean, I don't know. I mean, a good run is a year out of any author, I would think. 6 months really isn't development at all. It's just basically touching the tip of the iceberg. But a good run for an author, and if you're going to have an artist on there, is a full year. But if he's saying they're signed on for year 2, I find it hard to believe that this 43% drop or 44% drop in sales, there must be more to it than that, because that's a pretty significant drop for them to commit themselves to a year or 2 with those two, with that particular writer, Grant Morrison.
Well, I remember reading too that issue 2 had a lot of reorders that would not have been counted initially. So perhaps that number is going to get bumped up once they get done. But, again, the wild card is the digital sales, and we don't really know what the true sales figure is.
Yeah, I would think that number is going to go up at some point. I find it hard to believe that there's that many fans out there that it dropped that significantly, especially over the other 3 titles, especially over New 52 for that matter.
Right. I think a lot of it is everybody jumps onto a number 1 because they think they still think in this day and age it's a financial investment, which is kind of funny, but there's that, and everybody thinks it's a jumping on point. So you kind of wonder if that's part of it, or is part of it the fact that the first issue had so many different variants that number's kind of inflated a little bit. That could be too.
Well, and also it was pretty hyped when it was preceding or when it was released, and there was a lot of promo spots about it and a lot of different comic books and everything. So I read a bunch of different stuff just as much as you do. And every once in a while you'd come across that banner shot of Green Lantern number 1. So maybe that was it. Maybe new readers jumped on and then didn't like it as much as they thought. I don't know. But I have a feeling that number is going to probably change a lot.
Yeah, I think it takes a good 6 or 7 issues before a book actually settles into its normal ongoing number. You know what I mean? It kind of takes a while to settle down.
Yeah, I agree.
The other big thing is in terms of the movies. Now, Jeff Johns is still writing the script, so I take anything they say about the Green Lantern Corps movie with a ginormous block of salt.
Right, exactly.
Because, the people are still clinging on to the older Hal Jordan, young John Stewart thing, and that's all a thing of the past. There was a casting sheet about that. That was back well before Jeff Johns took over the writing reins. That was back during the David Goyer thing. And that whole thing's been thrown out the window, and basically Jeff Johns is starting over. So I take a lot of this stuff really, like I said, with a big block of salt, because we don't know where this movie is in terms of development. So when they came out recently and there was this, I think it was a lot of it was just clickbait of saying, well, Zac Efron is up for Green Lantern Corps. And it was all based on an artist who basically took Zac Efron and made him look like Hal Jordan is fan art. And you know, what happens in this day and age, and it's rather disheartening, because you repeat something often enough and it becomes the truth. And one site will say, well, you know, there's a rumor that this, and then somebody else will copy that, you know, they'll take that story and say, well, according to reports, this is what's going to happen. And enough outlets pick up on the same story, it suddenly lends an air of credibility that isn't really there. I think, you know, if this is true, what is Zac Efron going to be playing? I don't think they're even in the casting stage yet. They don't even have a director yet. So I don't think a whole lot about that. But the exciting thing, I don't listen to Kevin Smith a lot in general. I enjoy him sometimes, but I don't.
I was wondering if you caught this or not. I was listening to it the other day.
Oh, yeah. He was recently on doing his podcast. He has a show called Fat Man and Batman, and he was talking about how, you know, he was kind of sworn to secrecy over an NDA over a number of things, but he apparently was visiting the set of Star Wars and was talking to a lot of the effects people, and they were the same effects people that had worked on Justice League, and they were saying, hey, you know, did you know this stuff about Justice League? And he goes on to talk about how that scene in the trailer where Alfred talks about, you know, hey, you're here, maybe hope's not lost kind of thing. There was a big fan theory about that being Green Lantern, because there was a little bit of a green light reflected off of Jeremy Irons' eyes, the man who played Alfred. And he said, you know, basically that was true, and that Zack Snyder had the plot laid out for 3 Justice League films, and they had Jim Lee storyboards where they'd mapped it out, because the effects people needed to know what they were going to be expected to do in the long haul, and they wanted a sense of continuity from movie to movie to movie. So they were trying to figure out, well, how am I going to do this effect here if I know later on I got to do it in a third movie to do certain other effects? Well, according to this story, the trilogy, the first film, is very much like what we got before Joss Whedon got his hands on it, with a couple of things being different. One being that there was a cameo of Green Lantern, whether that was Hal John or an alien Green Lantern, no one knows. I mean, there was a rumor at one point that there was a cut scene, but you know, apparently there was going to be a Green Lantern scene, and then at the end of the movie, when the portal opened up to take Steppenwolf back to Apokolips, Darkseid would be on the other side, and the Justice League would see Darkseid, and Darkseid would see Earth, leading into the second film where the Justice League would go into space, the Green Lanterns would feature prominently, and they would do a whole big cosmic battle with Darkseid, lose tremendously badly, and it would end with Darkseid taking over Earth, and then the third film would be the Justice League liberating Earth from the clutches of Darkseid. And it even tied back to the vision that you see in Batman versus Superman, where Batman sees the Darkseid logo, and it was all tied together.
But see, I mean, it's just another tidbit of information for the hashtag release the Snyder Cut. I mean, Zack Snyder had a vision when he began Man of Steel, and I guarantee you that his vision was big. And from what I heard now, he's back on board with Suicide Squad #2. Yeah,
I heard he's producing or executive producing this.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. There must have been some kind of creative differences between him and Warner Bros. At that time. I mean, nobody's ever going to know, because nobody ever talks about it.
Well, a lot of it was, his daughter passed away.
Yeah, and there was that too, but. I mean, this whole release of Snyder Cut thing has been still going on and on and on. And I still get Twitter beats about it all the time. And it would just be interesting if there was ever kind of a release about if there was ever truth to what Kevin Smith's talking about. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, it took us a long time to get the Donner cut, but hopefully it won't take us as long to get the Snyder cut. It'd be interesting to see what was there. I mean, they didn't film a Green Lantern. I mean, according to what that story talked about, is that, Kevin Smith said they shined kind of some green lights on Alfred to make it look like a green glow, but they never actually filmed that. That part was cut before they even got there. And, the rumor was it was going to be Kilowog showing up. And personally, I thought it would have been cool if it was Abin Sur. Abin Sur dies in the second film, leaving the ring to Hal, and Hal shows up in the third one to help liberate Earth. I thought that'd be kind of cool, but that's just me, you know.
Right. And it makes sense too, you know what I mean, from a storyline perspective.
Right. So, you know, who knows what's going to happen with this film?
I mean, I don't know. They're so secretive about everything that they're doing now, and I think because they got bit pretty hard with Justice League and Batman versus Superman. I mean, like it or not, I mean, I was a fan. I think they both were done well, and I still enjoy them. But I think they got bit really, really hard by it, and I think they've learned their lesson from it, whatever that may be, whatever that lesson was. And I think moving forward, they're going to start concentrating on singularity, and then maybe somewhere down the line, pulling it all back together.
Yeah, I mean, they kind of said, they implied that this shared universe notion is very much secondary to making just good movies. And right. I don't see anything wrong with that. I mean, the problem I've had with the shared universes is that, you inevitably have problems with things that don't make sense. You know, for example, if you go back and look at Man of Steel, Wonder Woman was Wonder Woman at that point. If you see the Earth being under attack by these world engines, don't you think Wonder Woman would have shown up?
Right, exactly.
You know, stuff like that. Or, I always had problems in the Captain America Civil War movie where, we're led to believe that Nick Fury is dead, but yet none of the Avengers show up at the funeral except for Cap and Black Widow. Right. Stuff like that has always kind of bothered me a little bit. And,
sure.
So I don't have a real problem with it. I hope they don't abandon the idea of making another Justice League film somewhere down the road. I really would love to see it. I just think that, the geeks and all of us, the fanboy and all of us wants to see this team up show up at some point with some roster.
If you look at it like this, okay, so Wonder Woman was a really well done movie. I mean, it was just phenomenal. But if you look at after Justice League, then you got Aquaman. Okay. So as long as you keep the threads alive that show that there's a certain continuity, then I think that would be WB's best choice moving forward. Because even in Aquaman, there was one brief line about him being in Justice League fighting Steppenwolf. And that was all it was a reference point. But I think that's a good cohesive to have if you're moving forward, because then you could throw something into Shazam or a couple of references in Shazam. And then that there's a continuity that exists. And then sooner or later, when you want to bring it all back together, you can align them all.
Yeah, I think that's a really smart way of doing it, because you can at least hint to the fact or underscore the fact that these films are all taking place on the same planet in the same reality, but they don't have to be attached at the hip.
Right, exactly.
All right, my friend. Well, let's take a quick pause, and when we get back, we're going to start talking about the origins of Guy Gardner.
All right, love it.
What up, dweebs? This is Guy Gardner. You're listening to the podcast of OA.
Welcome back, everybody. And we're going to be doing a retro review, a couple of them this episode. And the first one is my pick for this episode, and it's issue number 59 from Green Lantern Volume 2. This is an issue from 1968. It's actually one of the last issues that has the creative force that brought Green Lantern into the Silver Age. This issue was edited by legendary DC figure and comic book figure Julius Schwartz and written by John Broome, drawn by Gil Kane. So Gil Kane, right? Gil Kane and John Broome. These are the guys that did it all in the beginning. And it's an interesting time period, because this is, during the space era, leading up to that, Hal Jordan's career as a test pilot was a very glamorous job. And after we went to the moon and did all these other things and all these space exploration missions, being a test pilot kind of became not so glamorous. And DC struggled with, well, how do we make this character cool? So they did what anybody else would do. They made Hal Jordan an insurance adjuster. Yeah, I mean, I don't know whether it was an attempt to ground him a little more or what, but so Hal Jordan is an insurance adjuster at this point. And this issue is really kind of neat because I don't know whether Guy Gardner was actually created to be an ongoing character. There's implications in this issue that he is, but the weird thing is after this issue was done, John Broome and Gil Kane didn't work together again on this title for a long, long time. In fact, I don't know if they ever did again or not. John Broome left the book after this issue and didn't write another Green Lantern book for almost a year. So any plot threads at the end of this issue kind of were just left to die on the vine. But it starts out with Hal on Oa. And the Guardians are talking to him. They're kind of giving him a tour. Hal's there for a 2-day seminar, if you can picture that. And I see Green Lanterns at workshops, how to use your ring, and but they're showing Hal around, and there's this really large contraption, which again, think of 1968 visions of technology. The idea of something as small as a cell phone doing something like this would be a little far fetched, but this machine that they show him is kind of like a memory bank, but it's not a memory bank of living people. It takes its data from the brains of people after they've died. So a little macabre. This is something I think would fit into the Morrison run really well, because it's right up there with what he would do,
It really would.
It basically allows the Guardians to do what they call mental postmortems. And I can see the usefulness, if you can get over the macabreness of it all, that, if somebody died, you could at least find out maybe who killed them, or you could gain evidence from that to help in the greater good. But what they do is they show Hal's origin from Abin Sur's point of view. So you get a bit of a retelling of Hal's origin, but it's fleshed out a little bit different. One of the things from the Silver Age that always stuck out to people was that in Showcase number 22, Hal kind of calls himself Green Lantern, but Abin Sur never tells him what that is. So you're like, well, this is an identity Hal made up for himself, but how come there's this whole group of them? So this kind of retcons that a little bit, and it has Abin Sur mentioned to Hal that he's part of the Green Lanterns. So that was one of the changes they made to Hal's origin. The other one was that, for the longest time, it was, you had to be fearless to be a Green Lantern. And while that's still true, they added in, John Broome said you had to be fearless and honest. So they added a little bit more of a qualifier that you had to be a good person, not just somebody who was fearless.
Okay, gotcha.
Which is interesting. Now, the death of Abin Sur is still the same and so on. And this is where they reveal the idea that when Abin Sur passes away, the Power Ring finds two individuals who are equally deserving, one being Hal Jordan and one being Guy Gardner. And that where Abin Sur crashes is equidistant between the 2 points. So they are exactly the same distance apart, if you can believe that. And Guy Gardner is a phys ed teacher on the East Coast, and Hal's a test pilot on the West Coast. Yeah, this is
Great
not.
job.
Yeah. This is not the Guy Gardner that most people are familiar with. This is Guy Gardner before the effects of being trapped in the Phantom Zone, and so basically Hal finds out about this other guy, and he's like, well, wow, that's really kind of neat. It's interesting that there's another guy who, like myself, that could have been Green Lantern. I wonder what would have happened had he been chosen. So the Guardians are like, well, hey, we've got this other machine over here that we can basically show different possibilities based on information we have. So they punch a few buttons, and here's the reality where this is what would happen if Guy Gardner were selected. And so we see kind of a reverse origin where Guy Gardner's selected. He flies to Abin Sur. He becomes Green Lantern. He struggles a little bit with things like flying because he's not a pilot. For Hal, that kind of comes a little bit more natural. But Guy overcomes that. He goes on to become a crime fighter. They show him taking out some bad guys. There's like a full-page summary where they talk about Guy Gardner beating Sonar and the Shark and Black Hand and Dr. Polaris, and even capturing Sinestro when he goes rogue. Where the story between Guy and Hal separates is that Guy, when he's summoned to Oa and is kind of given the tour of Oa for the first time, when he goes back to Earth, he takes a different flight plan than Hal does. And as a result, he encounters a battle going on this planet, and he goes down to this planet, and what he finds out is that the planet is inhabited by children who have never grown up. And basically the parents, the adults, died to a plague a yellow plague, of course. But they died to a plague, and the kids never aged. They never matured and so on. But they had these giant toys, these robots, and so they're fighting with each other. And Guy is basically pulled into being a pawn between these two warring groups of kids. And he becomes mentally controlled. He becomes basically a chess piece in their little battles. And he basically overcomes all that, gets the kids to get to peace, goes back to Earth just in the nick of the time before his power battery dies out, charges his ring only to discover that he has been exposed to the yellow plague. He starts to die, goes to get the next Green Lantern, which is Hal, and then Hal becomes Green Lantern anyway.
And everybody lives happily ever after.
Yeah. And what's interesting is that Hal's like, well, geez, maybe, is it okay, Guardians, if I go and I introduce myself to Guy Gardner? I won't tell him anything, but, I want to at least be able to meet the guy. So he does, and he goes and he befriends Guy Gardner. And of course, there's the Silver Age wacky thing where Guy Gardner's like, I had this strangest feeling. We've met somewhere before. But,
and it's funny reflectively when you think about their relationship at that point, look how long ago that was. And then think about how their relationship is now,
Right.
How it's so different.
Yeah. And Guy is not the policeman at this point. He's still a school teacher. This was his original origin. And we never saw Guy again until Green Lantern number 87, when they introduced John Stewart, and they only brought Guy back in order to cripple him.
Really? I didn't know that. That's interesting. So that's how long it took for Guy Gardner to come back from those issues, huh?
Yeah. He never really ended up being Hal's backup. He was created to be Hal's backup, but they never, and I think it's because John Broome didn't end up writing the books more, and the new writers that came in, Gardner Fox did some issues and stuff, and then Denny O'Neil came in. So they never went really any further with him being Hal's backup, and they never even introduced him as Hal's backup. But this, as the story goes, basically Denny O'Neil and Neil Adams. I can't believe my brain stumbled on Neil Adams of all people. But Neil Adams wanted to create a Black Green Lantern. And they go to Julius Schwartz and say, hey, why doesn't Hal have a backup in case, he's off of Earth and something goes on? And Julius Schwartz says, well, he already has one. And he explains about Guy Gardner. And Neil Adams says, well, it doesn't make sense. When you watch the Olympics, it isn't all just white guys. It's a little bit of everybody. There should be a black man that's chosen to be a Green Lantern. So they write Green Lantern number 87, and they basically reintroduce Guy Gardner so he can get hit by a bus and crippled. Just so they can make money.
That's some good Green Lantern history right there.
Yeah, so it basically paves the way for John Stewart to be there. So it's interesting. And years later, what happens is Guy recovers and he becomes a backup Green Lantern, and basically his power ring explodes. Not his power ring. Hal's power battery is sabotaged and it explodes, and it basically looks like it kills Guy Gardner. He's actually trapped in the Forbidden Zone with Zod, and he's tortured for years and years and years. And then when Crisis on Infinite Earth comes back, they revive Guy, but his time in the Phantom Zone and the brain damage caused by the explosion leave him with an altered personality, and that's where we get to the Guy that we know now.
Things happen, man. When big events take place, they take its toll on your psyche.
But it's interesting because I don't.
It's a good thing, Guy. We love Guy now, right? I mean, we love how he acts now. I mean, I like his persona right now, and I really liked how they wrote him in the animated series too. He was reflectively the same way he was in the comic books, and I that personality trait.
Yeah, I think it gives it a lot more flavor than it had just in its original origins, simply because Guy really, he's a good guy and all, but he doesn't really have much personality. And he comes out of the explosion and boy, does he have personality. And some people didn't like it, and some people thought he was kind of a jerk, but I think he was intentional to make him push people's buttons and be a different kind of character. And I think it helped him stand out.
I really liked him when he was a Red Lantern. I thought he was at his best when he was leading the Red Lantern Corps.
Yeah, I do too. I thought that was really kind of neat. I kind of wonder sometimes if it would have been good for DC to have left that his status quo, just because we've got so many characters being called Green Lantern, it at least gives him something else to do besides being just another Green Lantern.
Right. No, that would have been a perfect fit for him. He was really good at it, you know. I mean, and even for that matter, Kyle Rayner could have went over to the Blue Lanterns, you know, or maybe not. I don't know. But it would have been cool to see Guy as a Red Lantern more.
Yeah, but we'll never know. I mean, I should say never, because we never know what's going to come down the road, but we'll see what happens in the long term. But I thought it was an interesting telling of, you know, basically it was a good jump on point because it retold Hal's origin, but it gave you two origins in one book, which I thought was a little, you know, reading it now, it seems like, well, I just read this story with Hal. Now I'm reading almost the exact same story with Guy.
Sure.
But I don't know whether John Broome actually created Guy to be a long-running character. It implies that at the end because they become friends. Hal and Guy become friends, and it's implied that there's going to be more between the two of them, but it never really comes to fruition.
So, I mean, basically you don't know if he was an accidental character or not. I mean, he's got kind of the same basic origin as Simon Baz, because even when Simon Baz was created, I don't think they fully knew what Geoff Johns knew what he was going to do with him towards what few issues in or whatnot. And then his status is still in limbo to this day, even though nobody knows what he's doing now.
Yeah, we have not seen him since the end of Green Lanterns.
I wonder if he's going to show up in Heroes in Crisis.
I don't know. You know, I haven't read the most recent issue again because I haven't been able to get to my comic shop, but they still have not said who that character was in the very first issue that had a Green Lantern shirt on. Was it just a Green Lantern t-shirt? Was it Simon Baz? Who knows?
Well, the latest issue doesn't allude to anything either, so I'm just going to go ahead and tell you that now.
That's too bad. Not that it didn't sound right at all. It's too bad just because we don't know what's going on with the character.
Right. No, that makes perfect sense. But that was a good issue, Myron. I'm glad you picked this issue because, you know what, I don't think I've read this one. And if I have, it's been so long that I've passed over it or whatnot.
This issue is available on DC Universe, the DC streaming service. It's one of the free books that's on there. And it was collected in the Green Lantern, A Celebration of 75 Years hardcover that came out a couple years ago.
I like the cover of it. I'm looking at it right now. The cover's really cool with Guy Gardner standing over Hal. Yeah,
it's a neat. It's your typical Silver Age misleading cover.
Yeah, those were good covers back then. I loved them, and I loved the logo back then. I still like that logo design. Yeah,
I do too. I was kind of miss it a little bit sometimes, but it's cool. So let's take a quick pause, and then you're going to talk about Guy Gardner's first appearance. Not Guy Gardner, but Kyle Rayner's first appearance.
That's right.
So we'll be right back after this.
All right.
My name is John Mayo.
And I'm Bob Retall.
What is the Weekly Comics Spotlight?
Comics reviews from two fans with 65 years of combined comics reading experience,
who each get and read well over 100 different comics each month from Marvel, DC, and a wide variety of independent publishers.
Reviews that highlight books that may not hit everyone's radar screen since most people don't buy so many different comics each month.
Reviews with honest opinions. We enjoy comics but realize not every issue that we read is a solid gold masterpiece. All in about 30 minutes. So please check out the Weekly Comics Spotlight at www.comicbookpage.com/podcast.
All right, guys, welcome back. Myron, here we are again, and we're going to shift to another origin story, that of the ever popular Kyle Rayner. I'm sure we got a lot of fans out there that would love to hear this, and I'm sure they probably all know it, but it was a good time. It was a good time for me to revisit it myself because, you know, these came out back in the 90s. So back in that time frame, that was my developmental phase in high school. So it was kind of nice reading it from a different perspective, from an adult perspective this time.
Yeah, it's always neat to go back and reflect on things that you've read that had, especially if they had a lasting impression on you, to go back and revisit them later in life to see how, you know, sometimes it brings back those memories of how things were.
Well, and ironically enough, I grew up, when I read Green Lantern for the longest time, back in that time frame, I grew up with Kyle Rayner. And But a byproduct of that was I was so interested in the Spectre, which obviously that was Hal Jordan at the time. And then I was really, really a big fan when Hal Jordan came back. But I grew up with Kyle Rayner. I grew up learning about the Lanterns from Kyle Rayner. So I still have a certain attachment to him. I still like him as a character. I think he's underutilized. I think he has a lot of potential. But that's not for me to decide because that's up for DC to decide. So in that regard, I did a retro review on Kyle Rayner Volume 1. It was a trade. Now it does show the Emerald Twilight story arc, parts 1, 2, and 3, which shows the imminent demise and fall of Hal Jordan. I'm sure you probably remember this one.
Yeah, painfully so.
So jumping right into it, we start off with a big hole in Central America or in Midwest America and Coast City, and then of course Darryl Banks and of course his art is phenomenal anyway, and Fred Haynes, I'm sure you're familiar with him, and then of course this is written by Ron Mars, and if you're a comic book fan, you've heard the name Ron Mars thrown around from time to time. You're familiar with him, of course.
Oh, yeah.
So we start off Hal Jordan kneeling, hurt, destroyed, his arms in a sling. But I got a question for you at this point. What do you think of Hal Jordan with the gray temples?
I hate it. I absolutely hate it.
Really? Okay. So, see, I kind of like it.
I don't like it because none of his peers aged the way he did. Why is he aged so differently and so quickly? Because it happened almost overnight. I mean, it literally was one issue he didn't have it, one minute he did.
Yeah, you're right. You're totally right. I tend to like it, but that's just me. So we started off with the destruction of Coast City by Mongol. And then, of course, you got Hal Jordan standing there in the decimated whatever around him, and then he calls upon his ring to start making projections of his personal life. So the first one was really, really good because he ends up talking to his father, and I thought it was a really, really good dialogue that was shared between the two of them. It kind of showed the hurt relationship that they once had and how Hal Jordan still holds on to his memory a lot. And ironically, he still does to this day. So it kind of stays true to form with Hal Jordan and his attachment with his dad.
Yeah, they kind of took it that his father didn't approve of him, which is a little different than it is now. As a longtime Hal reader, I always struggled with that because it never really cropped up before, so it seemed like it was kind of made up. But that's just me. There were a lot of things about these issues that I struggled with, and that being one of them. Was that the relationship that was portrayed really didn't line up because Hal's father really didn't have an impact on Hal up to that point. There wasn't a whole lot of Hal reflecting on his father's death.
True. Good point. And then shortly thereafter, he runs into his mother, and some words are exchanged. But then Hal Jordan starts using his powers a little bit more, and he starts making more projections, more constructs. We see his Jennifer, Hal's love. It's an illusion only. Now, Jennifer goes back to what issue now? You're probably familiar with her, am I right?
She didn't exist before.
She didn't exist before at all?
No. Okay,
so she's an illusion only. She's Hal's love, and she didn't exist before, so there's no backstory to that at all.
Right. Basically, they didn't really destroy anybody that Hal knew that had been established as an established character.
Gotcha. Okay, gotcha. That makes sense. So he shares some time with this lost love or whatever, and it's funny because when you read it, you're made to believe that they got like some kind of history because he's really, really like holding on to her. Of course, then she goes away, and then his dad shows up again, and his dad ends up disappearing. And after his dad's disappearance, this is when Hal really, really gets ticked off. It's not fair. He wants to use his power for more. Ganthet visits him in a construct form, or whatever you want to call it, and tells him that he needs to return to Oa to face charges. Hal doesn't like that very much. So Hal starts off on his rampage, and he goes straight, and he starts on his tear straight to Oa. The really, really cool part about this was that at the end of the issue, the end of the first issue, which would be 48, is when they show Kyle Rayner sitting with Alex DeWitt. The infamous Alex DeWitt.
the Alex DeWitt that launched Gail Simone's career, yes.
Yeah, exactly. So it's kind of cool. They show them at the end, and they show that streak of green going through the sky, which is Hal Jordan heading to Oa. Then, of course, we move on to issue number 49, Emerald Twilight 2, the infamous cover with Hal Jordan on there in the green light. It's got all the rings on. I'm sure people have seen the Jeff Johns version of that when he posed for. Remember when he posed for that picture and he had all those rings on?
Oh yeah. The infamous multi-rings on the fingers thing.
That's right. Classic picture. Of course, more great cover art by Darryl Banks. And this one we have Emerald Twilight number 2. And this is when Hal Jordan starts battling just about every Green Lantern member that they throw at him. So the first up they have is, let's see this guy's name here. He's an all red guy. It's got the horns. I'm not sure if you're familiar with him or not. Ki Han of Varva.
Yep.
Right? Green Lantern. And then, of course, he comes across Liera, which was a cool Green Lantern. I liked her a lot, too. And, of course, he makes mincemeat of them, works right through them, moves on. And then the really cool thing that I like about the storyline is when he collects the rings. I mean, it's not that I'm an advocate for him, making mincemeat of everybody and just killing, but it's cool how he collects each of their rings and he puts them on so he gains more and more power. I thought it was a really, really cool kind of aspect of the storyline that kind of gave Hal Jordan more prominence. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
So, of course, then we go back to Oa, and then the Guardians at this point seem to be unbothered, but seem to be maybe just a little bit concerned. So then we come across Hal Jordan, and he comes up against Tomar 2, the famous Tomar 2. And, of course, he makes short work of him. Moves on, and he comes across Jack Chance. I think that's Jack Chance, right? Yeah. Jack Chance. Of course, he makes mincemeat of him. Moves on. Then we got Hanu. Hanu's a popular character. And then Graf Torin makes mincemeat of them. And then he comes across Boudica. Everybody remembers Boudica, I hope, right? You remember Boudica.
Oh, absolutely. And just to clarify, when you're saying he's making mincemeat out of them, he's not really killing them.
No, he's just going right through them, taking their rings,
yep,
and then leave for dead. Now, does anybody know? Do you know where Boudica is at this point? Because the last I know, she died, and she hasn't been back.
I haven't seen her back since she was killed off.
And I think she was killed off when she was an Alpha Lantern.
Yep,
I'm not mistaken.
That is correct.
Right. Okay, so he has a really, really cool battle with Boudica, and then of course he moves past her. At this point, the Guardians are starting to worry a little bit more, and then we come across the ever so popular Kilowog. Now, I think this would be their first battle between Kilowog and Hal, right?
Yeah, they were pretty friendly up to that point.
Right, so this is the first real battle, and then it's really, really cool because this battle mirrors itself when Hal Jordan goes rogue. And Kilowog goes after Hal Jordan. Remember that issue when the Rogue storyline?
Oh yeah.
Yeah, still one of my favorite storylines. So okay, so then he really beats him up pretty good. Great battle. I like the battle. I love the art in this issue. And then of course he collects his rings, and then Hal Jordan makes his way to Oa.
Yep, and actually when he actually kills Kilowog.
Oh, that's right. He does kill Kilowog. That's right. And then he makes his way to Oa. And then, of course, the big reveal at the end of issue 49, the almighty Sinestro. Which, by the way, the cool drawn Sinestro. I love the big arced eyebrows, and I love the mustache she used to wear.
Yeah, I thought Daryl Bakes did a really good job with Sinestro there.
Yeah, I liked it too. Okay, and then we'll move on to the popular issue number 50, Green Lantern 50, Emerald Twilight number 3, and the big showdown between Hal Jordan and Sinestro. Tell you what, this is probably one of the greatest battles I've seen between them two outside of the Sinestro Corps War. But then again, come to think about it, with the battles between Sinestro and Hal are always top notch, no matter who's writing them.
True.
So they go to each other on throughout back and forth, and then of course at the end of this, Hal Jordan kills Sinestro. Not without a lengthy battle though. Because this battle took place the whole entire issue 50.
Yeah, he snaps his neck.
Right. And then of course Kilowog comes back at the end. So he's not dead just yet. But then shortly thereafter, Kilowog is dead, because then Hal Jordan kills him for good this time. Faces off against the Guardians. Basically tells them all to go to hell. If I can say that on live air. and then of course, Hal Jordan takes on the persona of Parallax and wipes out all the Guardians.
Actually, does he wipe them out, or do they kill themselves?
Oh, you're right. They did kill themselves, didn't they?
Uh-huh.
Yeah, right. To try to stop them with the Central Battery.
Yeah, they took all of their energy and put it in one last ring.
Yeah, that's right. And then, of course, so they're all gone. He takes on a Parallax persona, smashes the ring, flies off, and leaves everybody there, all but Ganthet. So this part was the cool part. So from a writer perspective, if your Lantern Corps is decimated, and you, of course, the people who run the Lantern Corps is decimated. Under normal, so we as fans know that, and I'm sure you're familiar with this, that the ring chooses the wearer, right?
Right.
So
right.
Green Lantern Sector 2-1, whatever it is going to be, you have been chosen. The big difference between this one is Ganthet showing up on Earth and just presenting the ring to Kyle Rayner, which happens at the very end of issue number 50.
The infamous "You'll do" line, right?
Right, the infamous "You'll do." At first, it's kind of cool because, I mean, it's just a random character, and he's just chosen out of just by sheer luck. But from a writing perspective, I think that was the only thing they had to do at this point, because who else can you give it to? I mean, of course, at this time frame, any random character could have done at this point. It just so happens to be the character of Kyle Rayner, because this is the first time we've ever seen him in any comic book, period, if I'm not mistaken.
Right. And for some reason, Ganthet chooses to do that rather than give it to Guy Gardner or John Stewart, which I thought was a little strange.
That is a good point. I totally missed that. Of course, at the end of this issue, it's really cool because Kyle Rayner is wearing Hal Jordan's uniform.
Yeah, I think that was like the only time. Well, maybe there was a couple other times where he did, but for the most part, I think this is the only time you see Kyle in a classic GL uniform.
Right, and it's really neat looking. He looks good in it. Which, if I'm going to have any beef about Kyle Rayner, it's going to be his mask. To me, I mean, okay, so there's been a couple artists that I like that have done it right. Tyler Kirkham has done it really well, but for me, it's always been either too clunky, too overpowering on the face, or it's too small. I don't know how your views on it are, because I know it's unique to his character. But to me, it doesn't seem like it's ever drawn really right.
I think it's a hard mask to get right, given the angles that you might be at. One of the things, I think one of the best representations of it was when Kyle became a Green Lantern again after being the White Lantern for a while. And Ethan Van Sciver, I thought, did an excellent job of translating that mask and making it look right.
Yeah, you're probably right. And I like the Zion mask, but that's a different persona or whatnot.
So, Phil, my question for you was issue number 48 your first issue?
First issue of reading comic books?
Reading Green Lantern, yeah.
No, I think it was actually a few issues into Kyle Rayner, and then I actually think that I went back and I picked up issue number 51.
Gotcha. So this was probably, you probably read Emerald Twilight as a retro, like, I don't say retro, but you read it after you had already jumped in, right?
Yeah. So I read that. So this would have been after I've already gotten into Kyle Rayner or whatnot.
Gotcha. Okay.
So because I remember going to the comic book store and I remember picking up issue number 51. I mean, it was the all new Green Lantern. And to be quite honest with you, Kyle Rayner really attracted me as a character back then because, he was unique. I mean, he has his own style, and he's kind of a loner, and he's an artist, and he's kind of that type of character I geared to in high school, because I didn't know where I was fitting in at the time. So, and much like Kyle Rayner didn't know where he was fitting in with this comic book, because even in issue number 51, there's a lot of allusion to that with him and his girlfriend Alex DeWitt about him not growing up and him finding a job and doing all this other stuff. And of course, that was my high school years. I was expected to grow up and I was expected to find a job. So the allure to this character for me would have been at the time when I was developing and growing up myself. So,
well, I think, Kyle was an attempt to make a Marvel style DC character. I think Kyle was cut very much from the same cloth that Peter Parker is. And the whole thing for Kyle was to live up to the legacy of the ring that was given to him. And that he's being judged by the same metric that Hal was. He shows up and meets some of the other people in the DC universe and they don't know who Kyle is. They don't know if he's worthy of the ring. They don't necessarily trust him yet, but they have the barometer of they know what Hal could do. And so that expectation is thrust upon Kyle.
Yeah, it kind of is. And, to be quite honest with you, the first few issues of the Kyle Rayner, he handles the transition very well. I mean, he has his first little battle with this electric machine or whatever the case may be. But it's really kind of neat how much Alex DeWitt was integral in his development as a Green Lantern.
Yeah, that was the infamous woman in refrigerators thing. And like I said, that's what kicked off Gail Simone's emergence. She started a whole blog about women in refrigerators and that trope. And that really got her involved in the comics fandom. And that led to her ultimately becoming a comic book writer.
Right. And I remember that was a big ordeal when that went down too.
Yeah. It was that whole, she only existed to elevate Kyle or to give him his motivation, and wasn't a strong character on her own. And that was a time frame when probably the second wave of feminism was hitting. And so people were looking at characters and saying, well, this person is, retired damsels in distress. It was that whole era of when that started to really emerge.
Right. Because I remember them pushing a lot of the over-sexualization in comic books. And there was a lot of that going on because that was back during the time when Image Comics came out. And Image Comics was really, really known for drawing their females very graphic like.
Yeah, there was a whole thing about that back then. Yeah,
it really was. So issue 51, Kyle learns how to use the ring somewhat. He's developing as a character. Alex DeWitt, of course, is helping him out, and then he battles this electric beast or whatnot. And then, of course, at the end of the issue, this is when he picks his first his costume, that he's going with, of course, the big mask or whatnot. The next issue I really like, 52, because he battles. Not only does he battle Mongol, but he also gets to meet Superman for the first time. Excuse me. So Mongol breaks out of the security labs. I'm not sure if this. Sure where he's at. Hold on, I'm gonna go to that page here. That's Star Labs. It wouldn't be Star Labs at that time, would it? The Slap. No, I think it was a jail. It must have just been a jail. So Mongol breaks out of jail. He's on the lookout for Green Lantern. Well, of course, the interesting point about this is he automatically assumes that it's Hal Jordan.
Yeah, because nobody really knows what's happened to Hal yet.
Right. Nobody. Even when Superman shows up, he just learns that this Green Lantern is new. So he battles Mongol at the end on the beach. Takes his licking. Then he goes after. Then he looks like he goes after Alex DeWitt. And then, of course, issue number 53 is when Superman shows up. Sorry about that. I misquoted on the last issue. So this is when Superman shows up to take on Mongol and help out Kyle Rayner. And this is the first introduction we have to Kyle Rayner into like the whole kind of Justice League realm, because he ended up being in the Justice League shortly after this, right?
Yeah.
So we move through the battle with Mongul and then Superman and then Green Lantern, and they defeat him, send him packing, and then all is well at the end. And then, of course, the cool shot between Kyle Rayner and Superman finally meeting. And, of course, we have the cool, epic Superman with his mullet.
Yeah. Yeah, the super mullet. That was big back then.
The super mullet. Of course, Superman takes off with Mongul and leaves behind and tells Green Lantern good luck. So I decided to end it there just because the further issues just explore just a little bit more of him being a rookie Green Lantern. I just mainly wanted to read it and bring it into the retro to show the transference of the ring, to show how different that particular ring was how it was passed on to him as a particular character during that time frame.
And it actually is Hal's ring too, because if you recall, he steps on the ring and crushes it on his way into the power battery, and then they reconstitute Hal's ring and put their essence into it.
That's right. Ganther just rebuilt it. So otherwise, a cool issue. I'm still a fan of Green Lantern, or I'm still a fan of Kyle Rayner, and I hope that he shows up someplace. I'm really digging him in the Titans, and I really think he'd be a good fit for the Titans. But like you said, we'll go back to we're not sure where he's going to show up after April.
A piece of Green Lantern trivia: did you know that Emerald Twilight isn't the only time that Coast City was blown up?
Didn't know that. When was the other time?
The other time took place the exact same year in 1994. I believe it was Adventures of Superman Annual number 6. It was an Elseworlds tale in which Coast City is also destroyed.
Huh, I didn't know that.
And what's different is that Hal goes on to become a character called the Gravedigger. And that what Hal does is, because he wasn't there to rescue Coast City, he basically devotes his life to burying the dead.
That's interesting. Really, I did not know that.
Yep. And then he basically, long story short, Superman kind of goes bad. It's too convoluted of a story, but it's like a couple different annuals tied together, and it's one big story. But he basically joins a force called I think they call themselves the Super Seven. And he basically tries to get Earth back, because basically Earth is being overthrown. And he heads up to find new metahumans and maybe form a new Justice League. But yeah,
isn't Super 7, isn't that a Grant Morrison?
Yeah,
Morrison?
Yeah, that was a miniseries that he did. Yeah, I don't know whether he based the name off of this story or not, because it's not really connected in any way. But he basically, like I said, he devotes himself to burying the dead out of respect, because he wasn't there to save them. And he actually has a really different outfit. It's almost like a black unitard kind of thing with a green coat, and he has a Green Lantern armband on, and he has a mask which is more like something tied around his head. Very nice.
I'm looking at it right now. It kind of looks like a Zorro type of mask.
Yeah, exactly. It was interesting that. I don't know whether it was done intentionally, because there was a lot of, the year that story came out, there was a lot of brouhaha from creators as well as from fans. And I don't know whether this was this writer's way of saying, no, this is really how Hal would have dealt with it. I don't know. But it was interesting that they both chose to blow Coast City up. And it was published in the exact same year. So
was this in the Adventures of Superman?
Yeah, it was. Yeah, it was basically the annuals from 1994. The Superman annuals were one story all tied together, and so Adventures of Superman Annual number 6 is the first time that Hal shows up in the story.
Okay, that's right, because that's part 1, The Longest Night.
Yep, and then there was Superboy Annual number 1. I think was the second part. I think it was a 2-parter, and the other one was in Superboy Annual number 1.
That's interesting, man. Looking back, I remember. I probably remember getting this at some point, but man, I just don't remember reading it. We read so much over the course of the years, but I wouldn't have remembered this. In 1994, I would have been 2 years out of high school.
I turned 30 that year.
I'll tell you what now where my mind was 2 years out of high school.
Right.
Being with a girl or trying to find a job at that point, you know what I mean? Just working what I could do.
Well, it makes sense why Kyle would appeal to you.
Yeah.
For me, I didn't, because I was already past that point in my life. I found myself almost disenfranchised at that point. And some of it was because of the way the story was written. And I don't want to go back and go through Emerald Twilight with a fine-tooth comb, but there were things about the story, like characters who we'd never seen before suddenly showing up and being so important. Well, that was because they didn't kill anybody off that really was of importance, or, Hal hadn't been in Coast City for years. So how much did it really impact him? And the oddest thing was that in issue 47, it's a team up between Hal and Ollie, and Hal's okay with what happened. So it was really for people that had been reading the book at the time, it was very jarring because the story was like, Coast City blows up. It's a tragic thing. Hal moves on from it. He and Guy, basically, Ollie is there to kind of make sure Hal's okay and he's fine. And they have an adventure together, and Hal comes to terms with the loss of Coast City, and you're ready to go into what would have been, Gerard Jones' version of Emerald Twilight, which is a vastly different story. That would have led to Hal not being Green Lantern anymore anyway, but it wouldn't have done what it wouldn't have turned him into a villain. But it would have led way for a new Green Lantern regardless.
Gotcha. Okay.
So it's
really
interesting.
Cool. Really, I have to pick this up and read it. That's what sounds really interesting. And in fact, I don't remember reading it. I'd like to try it. I'm going to try that out this week, I think.
Yeah, it's a good 2-part story. I mean, it's an Elseworlds, so there are things that take place that they take more risks than they would take in terms of characters living and dying because it's an Elseworlds, so they can do whatever they want to do creatively, and there's no repercussions.
Right. Yeah, I'm going to check that out.
Now, this was your recollection of this thing was through the Kyle Rayner Volume 1 trade paperback that's out, correct?
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's really weird is they were going to do multiples of these. And I know there's a volume 2 coming out, or it may already be out, but they canceled them at it's the second one, even though they'd solicited a third.
You're talking about the Kyle Rayner volume 2?
Yeah.
Oh, it's out. I have that.
Is it? But for some reason they canceled it at 2, which doesn't make any sense to me.
Oh, really? I wonder why. That doesn't make it. Yeah, you're right. Because there's a lot of issues of his that.
Right.
A lot of issues.
And they really haven't been collected in trade before. So, it's a good opportunity for people to be able to read those stories that didn't get to read them before. But for whatever reason, DC's not going to print them, which is strange.
Huh.
Well, thank you.
Decisions.
Yeah, it's weird, but the good stories to pick. So we do have a couple of emails to read, so let's do that real quick after a break, and we'll read a couple of emails.
Okay, great.
This is Giancarlo Volpe, producer of Green Lantern, the animated series, and you're listening to the podcast of OA.
Hey, welcome back, everybody. And, Phil, we got a couple of emails. So let me read the first one. This is from Tomar, which I'm not sure whether this is the Tomar.
It's got to be. I'm going to say it is.
It's a long distance email coming from Tomar. So anyway, he says, you guys had some good comments about the reduction in GL titles with no home for Guy, Simon, and most of the Corps. How about bringing back a quarterly oversized Tales of the Green Lantern Corps book? And this is in response to our conversation last episode. So what do you think, Phil, about bringing back a Tales of the Green Lantern Corps book?
I wish they'd just bring back a Green Lantern Corps book, just a solid Green Lantern Corps title book. I mean, I think we got enough. I think there's enough fans that can handle it, and put all your other Green Lanterns in there and just leave Hal Jordan with just the Green Lantern title. But it would be cool to see the Tales one, because then at least you can see what they're up to, certain exploits or whatnot, instead of being left hanging like nobody knows where Kyle's going to end up. He's just going to show up in another book again, like he did in the what was that book called? The Omega Men?
Oh, the Omega Men. Yep. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. When he showed up in there, and it's like, that was random. Who knew he was going to show up in that book? But it's like that's what they do with him. And but I wish these guys would all find a home. I wish Jessica Cruz would get more involved with Corps. I don't know if I really like her that much in Odyssey. I liked her more when she was working with her peers, and that was like Simon Baz and some of the other Lanterns or whatnot. But I understand that you got to go on your own kind of journey. So I kind of appreciate her for what she's doing in Justice League Odyssey, but it's just, for some reason, I don't know if I'm attaching to that title very well. But as far as a Tales book, that'd be awesome. It's just, you never know what these publishers are going to do from any given day, you know?
Yeah, I've always felt like the Green Lantern Corps, the Tales of the Green Lantern Corps stuff that they used to do back a long time ago, and eventually they kind of did their own little thing with it, that the Green Lantern Corps is tailor-made for an anthology book. And I really do wish, it was Green Lantern Quarterly back in the day. I'd love to see them do something like that again, just because there are characters that are really, really cool that don't get a spotlight shined on them an awful lot. And boy, wouldn't it be nice to know where 2/6 is right now and some of these other characters where they could have little one-off stories. And I always thought it was cool that if you got back to the days when we had the Green Lantern Corps book and we had the Green Lantern book, if you'd had a Green Lantern Corps Quarterly or a Tales of the Jail Corps book where you could spotlight some of these characters, and then when they showed back up in the main book, you could almost start plot threads in this third series and bring them in, you know what I mean? And cross-pollinate stories between the books.
Right, exactly.
But yeah, I'd love to see that kind of a book. And I do agree with you too, Phil, that we need a Green Lantern Corps book again.
Yeah, I mean, it only makes sense because then it's a standalone story. I mean, it would work much the same way as Guardians of the Galaxy. I mean, it's no different. I mean, they're kind of a standalone story, but they still fit into the bigger picture, and you can essentially do that with the Green Lantern Corps book. And then you got writing freedom because then you can start introducing all the the other Lanterns again.
Now, Phil, are you reading Justice League Odyssey?
Yeah, I am.
So
3 issues behind.
Okay. So my question for you is, are they writing Jessica like she was in Green Lanterns? Are they dealing with her anxiety issues, or are they just using her as a generic Green Lantern?
To be quite honest with you, the first couple of issues, it seemed like she was dealing with the anxiety stuff a little bit, but I haven't really caught up in the last, I think they're on issue 5 or 6 right now. I'm not really sure which one they're on. I think they're on 5. So I read the first 2, and it seemed like she was fine. But I haven't, like I said, I haven't read the last 3 yet, so I'm not really sure. Have you heard otherwise, or?
No, I haven't. I was just curious as to whether or not the writer of Justice League Odyssey was going to continue that part of her personality. I was afraid that if they put her in the book, they put her there just to have a token Green Lantern, and that, hey, they need a place for Jessica to land, so let's shoehorn her in there. Were they going to overlook her character development and progression with her anxiety, or were they just going to, use her like any other Green Lantern would be?
Well, it's funny you mentioned that, because I'm curious to see if I could find out whether they're doing that or not, because I know that was a lot of people on social media were talking about being relatable to Jessica Cruz because of her anxiety issues that she had, and there a lot of friends that I follow on there really relate to her entirely because they're going through the same kind of things that she is, and I think that's what made her a popular character amongst females. I'm not sure about the males because I don't suffer from anxiety. I like her. I think she's a great character. But I liked her better as Power Ring, and I think we've already talked about that before.
Right. Yeah, my only concern is that if they're using her as a generic Green Lantern, that they're going to not give her the voice that she's had, and will her fans stick with her through that? You know what I mean? Because if she's not being used is her true character, will they lose what attracted people to her in the first place?
That's a good question. That's a good point. When I get caught up on it, I'll let you know. We can touch base on that the next episode.
Cool. All right. Well, Phil, we got a second email. Why don't you read that one for us?
All right. So this one is from Mr. Thomas Fraley, and Thomas writes, "Hey, Myron and Phil. Hope you guys are doing well. We are. Cold, but we are. Podcast, as always, is fantastic. I'm glad to hear Phil getting more comfortable as co-host. Thank you. He is so right about that because I know it took me a little bit to get my feet wet. And you and I talked about that, and it's starting to come. But there's still times when I still get nervous and talk. These past couple episodes, you have been talking about too many human lanterns, which got me thinking. What are your favorite alien lanterns? Also, did I miss something, or did the plotline Green Lanterns about Volthoom possessing Rami go nowhere? Keep up the good work. Thanks, Thomas Fraley." All right, well, Tom, I can touch base on the favorite Alien Lantern. I've always been a big fan of Sodom Yacht. He's been my favorite Alien Lantern since I can remember.
I have too many to list all of them, but I think amongst my favorites are Tomar-Re, Kilowog, and Aricia.
Aricia is cool. You're right. That's a good pick.
But I also like Princess Iolande. You can rattle them all off. What I loved about the Green Lantern mythology is it's so rich in character, in that when you see these interesting alien characters, I instantly want to know more about them. You know, that's always been to me maybe the biggest frustration is when an artist creates a new character, puts him on a splash page, and we never see him again because I'm like, I want to know that guy's story.
Right, and it's really cool about the Green Lantern ring because it doesn't discriminate, right? It just picks whatever species or whatever ethnicity you are.
Yeah. And to Thomas's point about the Volthoom storyline, like the Rage Seed, those plot lines I think have vanished and gone up in smoke.
Sad. Volthoom was a cool story arc with Volthoom. I kind of liked that arc too when it came out.
To me, it's another one of those cases of where, you know, you've got kind of an end of one writer's run and the next writer's got their own thing about what they're going to do, but there's left dangling plot threads that really do need resolution. You know, the Rage Seed being at the center of the Earth's core, I suppose you could say that it didn't grow anymore. And that you're out and you don't have to reference it again. But Volthoom running around the universe looking for the pieces of the ring and all that stuff, you kind of think it needs to have some kind of follow-up on it.
You'd think. You're right.
To me, you know, and I don't know how you feel, Phil, but to me, that's one of the problems I've had since Rebirth is feels like there's less of a sense of an organic DC universe. And I don't know whether it's just me. I mean, I felt like as much as people didn't like New 52, one of the things I did find about New 52 that I liked is it felt like it was a living, breathing universe and that these characters were all coexisting. But now it almost feels like it's continuity be damned. And if we're going to use this character over here, it doesn't matter what happened to them in their own book. And it's kind of all willy nilly.
So that makes sense because that's what they're doing with these movies. You know what I mean? They're not making them the cohesive that used to exist between all these titles. But you're right. I do remember that about New 52. It seemed like no matter if you read another issue somewhere else about an entirely different character, there was always some kind of inference that was taking place in the bigger universe, the bigger whole of DC.
It almost felt too like when a character would appear in another person's book, they'd almost reference the other guy's series as a way of cross promotion. You know, so that if Hal showed up in Superman or Superman showed up in Green Lantern, there'd be a editor's box telling you about what was going on in the other guy's book. You know what I mean?
Right. You're totally right. And those were really cool because then that would get the person to go pick up another title and see what he's doing over in that book.
Yeah, I find that I am reading less DC books now than I was before Rebirth.
I'm the same way. I've dropped a few. I haven't dropped a lot of titles. I still stick to my main core because I still like Wonder Woman. I still like the Flash. I'm thinking about getting rid of Odyssey. I still don't know if I really am attached to it or not. I stick to the Justice League books still. They're still talking about the Source Wall. We'll be talking about that till the cows come home. And Aquaman. I'm still a big Aquaman fan. He's always been one of my top favorites. And then Green Lantern. That'll never go away. That's about all the DC I pick up. Of course, I'm going to pick up Wonder Twins when it starts. I'm a big fan of that. Can't wait for that.
I sadly am pretty much down to just the Green Lantern book, and I'm reading a bunch of other companies' stuff at this point. Unless the character really grabs me, I haven't liked a lot of the decisions that have been made with characters. So I haven't stuck with them, which I feel odd because, you know, I've read the DC universe my entire life, and it just feels so odd. I almost feel like I'm not, like I used to feel like I was a part of it. You know, I used to feel like very connected to that universe, and now even the Green Lantern book isn't connected. I'm reading the Green Lantern book, and it doesn't tie into the rest of the DC universe. It's like I've got my own little universe unto itself.
Yeah, you're totally right. Yeah, I get it.
But, hey, I appreciate everybody writing in and sharing their thoughts. And I hope we hear some more from other folks. We'd love to hear what you have to say. And, you can always send an email to podcast@blogofoa.com. That's our new email address. So we'd love to hear from you that way. Or you can leave feedback on the website. Or you can call our voicemail line, which gives you about a minute or two to leave a voicemail. And the number for that is 406-POD-OA, which is 406-763-6362. And we'd love to hear from you guys and hear what your thoughts are and maybe suggestions you might have for retro reviews. That'd be great to hear too.
Absolutely.
All right. Well, Phil, let's take a quick break and we'll come back and wrap things up.
All right. Sounds good. All right, guys, welcome back. All right, Myron, episode 133, another one in the books for you.
Yeah, it's interesting to do these retro book reviews because it's forcing me to go back and reread stuff maybe I haven't read in a while, which is always fun to go back and revisit things. So, I enjoyed that, although I'd rather be talking about new books.
Me too. But, I mean, since we are getting rid of some of our DC titles, you and I both, it's kind of nice to fill that void with reading about the good titles that we used to read all the time, and that's going back and reading the Green Lantern ones and revisiting them.
I always make a point to make sure my wife knows I'm rereading the old stuff. So because I've got about 14 long boxes. And so I think it makes her feel good that I go back and reread the old stuff. Because it's perfect in the house. Yes, it's just not collecting dust or anything in my office here. Right. Sometimes I make sure that I let her know I'm reading old stuff.
Good point. Very good point.
But, we'll be back. We should have a Green Lantern issue coming up in a week or so. And you and I will be back again to talk about that and more.
Okay, sounds good, Myron.
All right. Well, hey, until next time, everyone, keep your power ring charged, treat each other well, and make every day your brightest day.
We'll see you guys next time.
The Podcast of OA is the official podcast of the Blog of OA and a proud member of the Comics Podcast Network. Share your comments and questions by calling the show's voicemail line at 406-POD-OA. That's 406-763-6362. You can send your emails to podcast@blogofoa.com. You can also find the Blog of OA and the Podcast of OA on Twitter and Facebook. Green Lantern and other related characters are the copyrighted property of DC Comics Incorporated and are used without permission. The Blog of OA and the Podcast of OA are fan productions and do not claim any ownership over the Green Lantern or any other copyrighted properties.